Hello friends, welcome back to Aunt Debbie's Boutique. We're continuing with our holiday decor series, and today we're going to make a Thanksgiving table runner. Now I have designed this with my inspiration being this fabric with the leaves in it. So it is going to be a quilted table runner, and it's going to have 4 different leaves. We're going to have the green one we're going to make today. We're going to have a red one, an orange one, and a yellow one on our table runner. I've already made those to save time, and I'll show them to you when we get to that step of putting it all together. But what you're going to need for this, and I just have scribbles. You can see I drew it up on some graph paper the way I wanted it to go. And you're going to need 18 blocks of some background fabric. And this is what I'm using for my background. And they're going to be 3 1/4 by 3 1/4, a square. Then you're going to need 3 3 1/4 of each of your colors. So I had 3 orange, 3 red, 3 yellow, and 3 green. Then we're going to need 8 2 1/2 inch squares for each color. You're going to need 1 strip that is 1 inch wide by 4 1/2 inches long for each color. You're going to need a total of 4 2 1/2 inch squares of your background fabric. So I just need 1 for this particular one. You're going to need a total of 3 each, which I have a few more than that here, for 3 for each color. So that would be, wait, it's 3? No, 6 of each color. I'm sorry. That's why I have so many. Of your background fabric. 2 1/2 inch square. And you're going to need 5 2 1/2 inch strips that are 8 1/2 inches long, and 2 that are the width of your fabric. You're also going to need a piece of batting that is 42 inches by 14 inches, and something for your back. And we're going to do a self-binding that comes up and shows on the back, from the back. I decided to go with the same background fabric, not make it too busy. And you need a piece that is 16 inches by the width of your fabric. Okay. The first thing we want to do is we're going to make a bunch of half square triangles. Oh, one more thing I want to mention is, if you have this will be real handy. You don't have to buy it to do this, but it sure makes trimming squares easy. And this is a rotating cutting mat. And another handy tool for this project is going to be a 2 1/2 inch ruler, quilting ruler. And we want one that's got a diagonal line down it. And of course, cutting wheel, rotary cutter, or you can also mark and cut with scissors. But the blocks that we sew together, the small blocks that we make like half square triangles and everything, I'm making them bigger than we need, and then we'll trim them down the right size. I'm not the best at being perfect, and so if I don't allow a little extra, I'll end up with one square that's just 1/8 of an inch too short or something like that. So I like to make everything bigger and cut it down. And that's what we're pretty much doing on this. The first thing I want to do is take our 3 3¼ inch squares of the background fabric and our 3¾ squares of our color. And we want to take and mark on one side of one of them. It doesn't matter which one. This one's lighter, easier to show. You just want to mark a line from corner to corner. And it doesn't matter if it's with something permanent or not, because it's not going to show. It's going to be a cutting line for later. Then with right sides together, we're going to match these up. Something is not cut right. These look a little bit bigger than they need to be, but that's okay because we're going to trim them up in the end. But we're going to sew from corner to corner. I'm sorry. We're going to use this as our guide, and we're going to sew 1/4 inch on either side of this line. And I want to take a minute to interject in here that when you're quilting, your seams accuracy is so much more important than it is on any other type of sewing. I am mainly a garment sewer. That's my first love and what I've done for 55 years or so. And I've just picked up quilting a few years back, and it surprised me how accurate you need to be so that all your corners match up and everything lays smooth in the end. You don't have gathered blocks or anything buckling. So cutting out accurately, and again, that's why I made it bigger, because sometimes I make mistakes like this where they're not exactly perfect. But and so I like to trim them down. But when you're sewing 1/4 inch, the more exact you can get, the better. And in a little bit, I'm going to show you a special foot that we can use, but it won't work on when we're doing the half square triangles. So we're going to sew down one side, up the other, but I'm going to chain them, sew down all one side, then sew down all the other. Okay, let's go to the sewing machine. Okay, now that we have our 2 seams sewn, And I'm using a black thread because black is the background fabric of all this. And also I wanted you to be able to see my seams real good, but you don't have to, I mean, just a neutral colored thread usually works just fine. Now we want to cut right on that line, and you can even either use your scissors or you can use your blade, because accuracy on cutting that is not important. We've got our seam sewn. Okay, now I'm going to open these up and iron them. And I want to iron to the darkest fabric. So I'm going to iron it like this. And I'm going to be real gentle because this seam is on the bias. And the bias stretches. That's why we have bias tape. So it will stretch around curves. And we don't want to distort our blocks. So I'm just going to open them up gently and iron them. Steam on them too. So you should have 6 half square triangles now. Sorry about moving the camera. I'm trying to keep everything centered that you need to see. Now, this is where this mat's going to come in handy. And our little 2.5 inch square. Now, you see the diagonal line there? We're going to line that up on our seam, exactly on top of it. Now you can line it up to one edge like this. Get a little closer. You can line it up the other edge like this. Or you put it in the center. And I like to put it in the center because I like to cut all 4 edges. That way I know they're all perfectly straight. And as you can see, this is why I cut it extra. So we can get our half square triangle as close to perfect as humanly possible. Now we have a perfect 2.5 inch square made that's a half square triangle. Now, because I messed up and didn't cut, it was the green ones were actually a little bit short. I would have had to recut those blocks had I not made this bigger. Now, one thing I want to mention is this seam is bulky. And when you put your little ruler on top of it, mine slides around real easily because of that. It doesn't set level because of that bulk. Now they make little grips you can put on the back of your ruler, and I actually have some. I'm just not real sure where they're at right now, so I'm doing it without them, but the grips should help. See, that moved on me just ever so slightly. And I will link this and this in the description box, just in case you want it. Uh-oh. Get that back on top of there. Now, some tools I consider a necessity and some are toys or just make the job easier. These are both items that make the job easier. Just a basic cutting mat and ruler and a cutting wheel I consider pretty necessary, and for some reason my board is come undone. I'm gonna have to check on that, but I'll do that outside of the video. It still turns. The last one. Okay, we have those done. I'll fix my board later. Of course, it always is going to break on camera. Our next thing we're going to do is take another one of these 3 1/4 inch blocks. That's the background fabric. And we're going to, instead of drawing a line, we're going to cut it this time from corner to corner. Then we're going to take our 1 inch by 4 1/2 inch strip, and we're going to center it here, sew that side and open it, and then sew this side and open it. And this is going to be our stem. So let's go sew that right now. Now I want to iron this, and it doesn't matter what's darker on this. We want to iron it towards the triangles because the seam would get too bulky otherwise and might even overlap a little. Now we want to bring it over here and also cut it with our little square. This time we want that diagonal line just right down the center. It's the center of your stem, I should have said. Yeah, my mat has a mind of its own right now. And there we have our stem that is a perfect 2 1/2 inch square too. All right, the rest of our squares I believe are going to be cut to the right length, right size to begin with. Now I want to lay out leaf, and I have to use my cheat sheet here, and I will put a pattern in my Etsy shop. I believe I had one too many of those. So we're going to start, maybe I should do it like this so you can see better. I'll do it upside down. Now I always have to look at my cheat sheet or I'll turn something wrong. And there are a lot of different leaf patterns out there that are similar to this. I just drew this on some graph paper, but there may be, I mean, you may have a better pattern. Whoa, whoa, whoa. See? That's why I need my cheat sheet. I'm missing 2 green ones. Okay, give me a moment and I'll be back with them. Okay, sorry about that. They're probably on the floor somewhere. I just cut a couple more and I still don't have this right. Goes like this, and like, no. There we go, like this, and like that. Now, that should look like a leaf. Now we need to sew them together, and I'll just sew them by rows. I'll take this first row and chain them all the way down. Then I'll come and grab this next row and add it to it, and then this third row. So you can watch me do that on the machine. Now this is where it's really going to come in handy to have this 1/4 inch foot, because it will make sure all our seams are the same size. We're not going to be able to trim any more of them. I mean, we'll trim them a little bit, but this is not made bigger. We'll just straighten them a little. And you want to make sure you line up your fabric real well too. Now, I'm going to open each of these up and sew the next row down on all of them. Got a little corner, a dog ear still left there, and that's going to get in the way of my foot, so I'm going to cut it off. Now let's take it over and iron these seams. Now we're all attached correctly to sew these seams together. But before we do that, let's iron the top row all one direction. And it really doesn't matter which direction you start with. And then I'm gonna iron the next row the other direction. And go back and forth, so when we sew our seams, they nest and it's less bulky. Plus, it gives your quilting this one got turned around. Your quilting's more stable, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Being a garment sewer first, I had a hard time pressing my seams to one side. To me, you should press them all open because they lay nice and flat. And they will, and they'll nest fine like that, and some people do that. But the reason, when somebody explained it to me, it made a lot of sense. The reason we like them turned one direction then the other is then when you're quilting through fabric, and not just, if you had ironed them both open and kind of tugged on them, all you'll be quilting through threads. This is a much stable way to make your quilt. So, lesson learned, and now I understand. Now we're going to go over to the machine and sew all our rows together. And we will nest. Can you see? This one's turned this way, this one's turned this way. And if it helps you to pin them, you want your seams lined up perfectly, you can pin them. I like just feeling them because sometimes they move a little even with pins. So I can feel and watch them. Okay, let's sew those rows. Now you want to make sure that you've got them turned the opposite direction because they can get flipped easily when you're sewing. So I want to make sure that one's going that direction and this one this direction. And I want to feel the seams butted up against each other. There's our first seam. My corner's off slightly there, but the others are all spot on, and luckily that's not going to show because they're the same color. Okay, let's go back over to the pressing table. Okay, now we want to iron it, all these seams just one direction. And I don't know if anybody noticed it when I was ironing it, but I did have one of the blocks upside down. I'd sewed in wrong, so I had to go back and rip it out and fix it. Never fails. Now, I'm going to starch this a little. You really should let the starch set for a bit before you iron it, but for the sake of the video, I'm not. Now I want to just trim it up ever so slightly. It should be 8.5 by 8.5, but all my blocks are coming out just a hair shy of that. They're not 8.25, but it's okay as long as they're all the same size. So I am just going to straighten this up ever so slightly. Okay, through with the trimming for now, and let's put our blocks together. Here's the other 3 that I did, and I chose to put them facing different directions. You can do it either way you want. You can have them go in the same direction or not. And I went ahead and put the strip of sashing in between these on the end, but I left the last 2 for demonstration purposes. Now, I'm just going to, with right sides together, put that one there, and then also that one there. So, and then we'll also put one here on the end. So let me go over to the sewing machine and do all that. We do not have to worry about matching any seams. We just want to make sure that our seams lay down flat as we go across them. Okay, on the back of this now, I press these towards the sashing because they lay smoother due to all the seams on the leaf part of it. here are our 4 blocks. Now the next thing we want to do is take our 2.5 that are width of the fabric and stitch them on top and bottom. But before I do that, I want to trim it up just a little bit too. And this might be a little difficult to get totally on the camera. Move this and get a long ruler. I'm lining this up on this line at the top, all the way across, and it will just ever so slightly trim off in a few places that aren't perfect. So you can see I didn't trim off very much at all. Now I'll do it again on the other side. And again, I just barely trimmed off a little bit. But once again, it's not going to matter as long as it's straight. If you have some of your blocks aren't evenly put together and you have to trim off a little bit more, that's fine. Just in this case it is. If you were setting this into a big quilt, every block would have to be the same size as the smallest one. Okay. Now I want to measure and see exactly how long it is, and I think the best way is to fold it in half because my yardstick isn't long enough. Okay, that's 20.5, so times 2 would be 41. So we want, let's measure the other side too. You want to make sure that they're the same, and they are. If they aren't, you need to even them up down there. Now we want this exactly 41 also, and I'm just going to do the 20.5. I think I'll do it like this so you can see it better. This is folded in half. And 20.5 is right here. And the reason we want to get this is exact is so it doesn't stretch out of shape. You want it square when you're, or rectangular I should say, when you're done. And so cutting it exactly and then forcing it to fit that is the best way to handle it. Now I'm going to take my runner and I'm going to pin it at both ends. And then I'm just going to stretch it out like this so it stretches flat. And pin it in the center a couple times on each end. That way you will make it be exactly 41 inches long. And you know, fabric can stretch just a little bit, so that's why you want to make sure you kind of force fit it. Another thing, it's a good idea to iron and even starch some of these pieces before you put them on. I did not do that on these bands, and it would have been better if I had have. They're not bands, they're sashing or borders. Now that I've pinned both sides, I'm going to take it over and still using my 1/4 inch foot, I'm going to sew the border or the sashing, whatever you want to call it, to both the top and the bottom. I'm making sure all of my seams are laying nice and flat as I go. It probably would have been better if I'd have flipped it and sewn from the other side, but that's 20/20 hindsight. This side I'll do that way. Now I've got all that quilted. You can barely see it on the back, which is what I like. I don't like it to be real predominant because I may not do a perfect job. The next thing we need to do is to trim off our extra batting around the edge and just trim it with our edge of our top piece. Okay, next we want to take a straight edge, excuse me, I hit the camera again, and I want to cut it about 1 inch bigger all around. And I barely have 1 inch down here on this end. And yes, that is some of the selvage showing, but it will be turned in, and I hope it will be turned in. Yeah, and it won't show. On the ends, I just barely have enough because this was almost longer than the width of fabric, but I'm gonna have enough. It's just gonna be close. Now I'm going to take my clips and I'm going to fold this in halfway and then fold it up. And these clips have a flat side and a bent side, if you can see that. And if you'll put the flat side up, that'll hold it a lot better. And I'm just going to go all the way around here and clip it. Okay, now we're going to take it over to the sewing machine and edge stitch all the way around, and then all we'll have to do is give it one last press and we'll be done. All right, it is done. I'm going to give it a good press. Especially around the edges. My steam's not hot enough at the moment, but I'll come back later and steam it a little. Okay, I'll just kind of slowly pull it across so you can see the whole table runner. That concludes our Thanksgiving decor series, and this Wednesday I'll put out a bunch of pictures showing this on a tablescape and all of the items that we made to go with it. And then it'll be time next Saturday to start our Christmas series. I hope you've enjoyed this, and if so, would you please give it a like and subscribe if you're new to the channel. I appreciate each and every one of you. Remember, whatever you do, do it to the glory of the Lord.